Yuan taking a center stage on this. Do you think, even from what Hashi is saying, that is the way we should be going right now? It's not only because we have a list of countries that can maybe just sweep up that and see that right now are seeking to de-dollarize their transaction, being led by Bangladesh. Do we have India? I think it's Bangladesh. I'm trying to get that list as we continue. But do you think what is happening is an upset of a global order that we should be preparing for?
The only thing that is constant about life is change. And if you don't change, as they say, change is going to change you. Now, this is an inevitable process, or rather consequent of a process, of course, of domination. Whether it's a domination, it could be a cultural aspect, financial aspect, of anything. At some point, it has to come to an end. And there's a perception, I think, from many countries in the global south, which are about more than 150, perhaps. That makes a majority of countries in the world, that perhaps the path the dollar has been used, has served to disadvantage them in terms of the international market. But then increasingly, what is emerging as the perception of weaponization of the dollar, of course, has also, I think, accelerated these kind of discussions. And we talked about that, last year, just at the beginning of the war, in Ukraine, that this may actually have an impact in trying to perhaps have countries move to alternative currency. Now, also the extent that a lot of economies don't have control, over their own finances, in part because they don't have control on how to determine their exchange rate in relation to the dollar, has added frustration. Now, the dollar is not going to be replaced overnight tomorrow. Let's be honest. The dollar is still extremely powerful. Many of these countries that, of course, are now exploiting alternative mechanisms, they have tons of investment in terms of reserves and bonds and stuff, and treasury bonds and stuff like that in the United States, or they have their foreign reserves, in the dollar. But the process has begun, and I don't think it's going to be stopped. What I think the president was also, trying to speak to is not exactly because the, president does not like Washington. I think everything he has done, says exactly the opposite. And so, he should not be interpreted as why the president doesn't want to dump the dollar. Is it because it's not friendly with the United States? It's the recognition of national interest. And what will be the national interest of Kenya? Now, I do agree with Irungu. We should always seek, at least that in my framing, we should always seek to pursue certain values. I think we are better off guided eventually by our values than just, transactional kind of engagements. But at the same time, as a country, we should deal with the world as it is at every time. And the world as it is right now, there's the world that we ought to be, that we are seeking. Even as a country, there's a place. We're trying to build a more perfect country. But then we have what we have. And what we have right now is an emerging multipolarity with inevitable consequences of chaos. Because if we take the example of our region, for instance, all of a sudden we have a lot of players, both from the emerging powers, like Gulf states, for instance, they're extremely active in the region. Some countries outside, within the Asia Pacific, they've increased their agency in the region. They're working independent of the old order or the unipolar world that was, of course, shaped after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And so, with these realities, is Kenya prepared to make use of this? There's Obama's, White House chief of staff once used to like to say, Rahm Emanuel, that never let a crisis go west. It is a time of crisis. We're going to exploit this crisis in a way it's going to advantage us, because even as a country, we're of course going through a transition. The region is going through a transformation. And if we're not very careful, if we do not have a strategy on making use of all the new chaos that have emerged, before things settle, we're going to find ourselves left out.
All right.
Yes.
Peter Kagwanja.
I like the question you asked about whether what we are seeing from the Global South is a disruption of the existing order the rebellion against the dollar or the effort to replace the dollar is simply that. But I think the crisis of the current system is deeper than that. How is it deeper? For now almost 200 years, we have built an international order based on the wrong notion, which was an imperial notion, that there must be a global hegemon. Right. And that the good Harvard professor argued that hegemonic stability is the basis of the global order. And hegemonic stability here means that there is one country that emerges as the overall policeman, the sheriff in town, that whips anybody else who is not kowtowing to its whims. We saw that in Europe. It caused the First and the Second World War because Germany and others refused to kowtow to British hegemony. Earlier on, we had seen Athens refusing to kowtow to the hegemony of Sparta and others. And we are now seeing Russia and China saying, no, we are not going to kowtow to the hegemony of the Americans and its allies. And therefore, the idea of hegemonic stability has collapsed. And we need to basically take it to Langata Cemetery. Second, now...
If you can find room.
Yeah,
it's full.
There's
the cemetery is full.
Yeah. The second thing is that the economic reality, America is on the decline. And I'm not pronouncing it. This is not new. It's on the decline. If you look at the debate in America itself about the debt and the crisis that they are facing, it tells you this is basically a superpower that is on the decline economically. It might not be militarily. Let's be clear about that. Militarily, America will remain strong for a long time. But as an economic power, in the next 10 years, it's going to be number 3. I mean, not by my estimation, but PricewaterhouseCoopers in their research, and they are not the only one. Now, what does that mean? You cannot base an economy on a weaker economy. And as we start now, China, India, Brazil, and Russia combined form the largest economy globally, more than even Western Europe. What we are calling the G7 when it meets, it's just a mockery of the reality on the ground. The G7s are meeting in Oklahoma. Japan, yes, Japan is a strong economy, and it will continue to be a strong economy because of its pragmatism. So the dollar basically is going. Now, why has it become difficult to finish, quote unquote, Russia? As the West would have wanted. Basically, you use all the technology, you use all the firepower, you put all the leopards and all the other types of tanks that are going there. Why has it become difficult to basically finish Moscow? Because the Cold War cannot be reenacted the way it was in the past years. Why can it be enacted? Because the powers, the West is in decline and the rest is on the rise. It is not about the rest means Brazil is on the rise. In Africa we are having the major powers, the regional powers. In Asia we are having major powers that we even never knew about, Indonesia and others, as leading economies and so on. So it is important for the West to now wake up and smell the coffee and know that we are getting into a multipolar world where hegemony is not part of the game. That's one. Two, that it is on the decline and that its rise and continued existence means having fair play with everybody else. And therefore, we have to go to the drawing board and restructure a multilateral order that reflect the equality of all nations and all civilizations as it was envisaged. And so there is no way, the idea of hegemony is gone. Whether you're having, what you can call a hegemon of alliances, like how America has governed the world in the last 70 years, where it is America and its Western allies. And that's what NATO is about. So the war in Russia is essentially the end of NATO. if you wish.
Critical point. I just want to add that one point. No, I just want to ask him. So, see, if we have the multipolar world that now we are maybe gravitating towards to, and we have yuan, which is now getting currency, upsetting the dollar as it is. Yuan will not be the answer.
No, but we are not talking. We are not talking about that. What we need is to have a conversation as to what do we need to replace the dollar. How are we going to have international economic transactions? Go to the ancient economy of Genoa and Venice in Italy, and that time, and they were transacting with African kingdoms of Mali, Ghana, and so on. They were transacting with China. How are we buying silk? There was no dollar that time. How are we buying silk from China in those years? How are we exporting our own ivory and everything else here? So the idea of a dollar was part and parcel of the hegemonic world order. And this is what we are saying, that the theory of hegemonic stability is gone. And therefore, we have a vacuum here, which we need to fill. It is not about the yuan replacing the dollar. I think that's the simple mentality of hegemony. It is not about the Brazilian currency replacing the dollar. It's not about the Indian rupee replacing the dollar. It's about us talking about the global economic order, the monetary system that we are going to have that enables Kenya to trade with Ethiopia without necessarily have to exchange, to go for third currency to exchange the bill and the shilling. Yeah, you know, we need to have an economic system that enable us to trade with Egypt with their currency without necessarily having to go to Washington to exchange the dollar. And nobody need to tell us that this is money laundering or money this or money this, because we are now the language of money laundering is basically the part and part of that what we are calling the hegemonic stability theory.
I want to add one or two points. My senior learned has raised a very important point.